Whatever you think you know about me, you're probably right. Those were the first words Anthony Moretti ever said to Grace Miller. She stood in his foyer, rain-soaked, nervous, clutching a worn resume, wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. Behind her, the rain fell soft and steady on Brooklyn's sidewalks. Ahead, 3 men in black suits stood motionless at the entrance of a mansion that looked more like a fortress than a home. Grace wasn't supposed to be nervous. She'd worked with foster kids, handled tantrums, navigated broken systems. But this felt different. The job posting had been simple. Nanny needed, Moretti residence. Excellent pay, discretion required. That last word should have been her warning. The iron gate had groaned when she pushed it open. One of the guards, tall, expressionless, spoke into his wrist. "She's here. Who needs bodyguards for a nanny interview?" Grace had thought. Now, standing in the marble foyer, high ceilings, cold silence, and the faint smell of espresso, she understood. Anthony Moretti descended the staircase, like a judge approaching a verdict. Tall, sharp suit, eyes like winter. He didn't smile, barely looked at her. "You're late," he said. Grace checked her phone. She was 3 minutes early. "I'm sorry, Working hours are 7 to 7. The boy doesn't like strangers. Don't ask questions about me or my work." His voice was flat, final. Grace swallowed hard. This isn't a nanny job. This is something else entirely. But then she thought of the rent she couldn't pay, the dream she'd been saving for, a child care center for kids no one else wanted. "I understand," she said. Anthony's gaze flicked over her, assessing, distant, and then he turned away. "Rosa will show you his room." He walked away without another word, his footsteps echoing through the empty house. Grace stood alone in that cold, beautiful foyer, rain still dripping from her jacket. One question burned in her mind. What kind of man needs this much protection from the world? She was about to find out. The house was a museum of grief. Rosa, the housekeeper, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, and a permanent worry line between her brows, led Grace upstairs. "Mr. Moretti doesn't talk much," Rosa said quietly. "Not since he lost his wife." "How long ago?" Rosa's mouth pressed into a thin line. 4 years, but in this house it feels like yesterday." They stopped at a door painted pale blue. Rosa knocked softly. "Luca, your new nanny is here." Silence. Rosa sighed and opened the door. The room was bright. Toy cars lined up on shelves with military precision, books stacked neatly, a bed made so perfectly it looked untouched, everything staged, nothing lived in. And beneath the dining table in the corner, a small boy sat with his knees pulled to his chest. Luca Moretti was 6 years old, with dark curls and eyes that looked far older than they should. He didn't look up when Grace entered. "Hi, Luca," Grace said gently, keeping her distance. "I'm Grace." "Nothing." "I heard you like dinosaurs. Is that true?" The boy's fingers tightened around his knees. Rosa whispered behind her. "He hasn't spoken to anyone new in over a year. The last 3 nannies quit within a week." Grace's chest tightened. She knew this kind of silence. She'd seen it in foster homes. Kids who'd learned that people always left. "That's okay," Grace said softly. You don't have to talk. I'll just draw over here." She sat on the floor a few feet away and pulled out a crayon from her bag, sketching a clumsy T-Rex that looked more like a lumpy chicken. She hummed under her breath, off-key, silly. Luca's eyes shifted, just a little. Grace kept drawing. Then, deliberately, She knocked over her bag. Crayons spilled everywhere. One rolled under the table and stopped right by Luca's shoe. Grace gasped dramatically. "Oh no, my crayons are staging an escape." She scrambled to gather them, purposely clumsy, bumping her head on a chair leg. And then a sound, soft, fragile, unexpected. Luca laughed. Grace froze. Rosa's breath caught. The boy's hand reached out and picked up the crayon. He held it out to her, his eyes still cautious but no longer empty. "Thank you," Grace whispered. Luca didn't speak, but his lips curved, just barely, into the ghost of a smile. From the doorway, unnoticed, Anthony Moretti stood watching. His expression didn't change, but his hand, resting against the doorframe, slowly unclenched. For the first time in 4 years, something shifted in that silent house. Grace spent the rest of that first day learning Luca's world. He didn't speak, but he communicated in other ways. He'd point to books he wanted her to read. He'd arrange his toy cars in specific patterns, then look at her to see if she noticed. He'd sit close, not touching, but near enough that she could feel his presence. By lunchtime, Luca ate 3 bites of sandwich while sitting next to her. Rosa nearly dropped her dish rag in shock. "He hasn't eaten lunch without a fight in 6 months, the housekeeper whispered. Grace watched Luca carefully arrange his apple slices into a circle on his plate. "He just needs to feel safe." "We've all tried to make him feel safe. You're the first person he's responded to." That afternoon, Grace took Luca to the backyard, a sprawling space with perfectly manicured lawns and gardens that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Beautiful but sterile. "Want to help me look for interesting rocks?" Grace asked. Luca hesitated, then nodded. They spent an hour searching through the flower beds, collecting smooth stones and pieces of colored glass. Grace narrated everything like they were on a grand adventure, making up stories about each treasure they found. "This blue one," she said, holding up a piece of sea glass, "probably traveled all the way from the ocean. It's been on quite a journey." Luca touched it gently, then looked up at her. "Journey," he whispered. Grace's heart nearly stopped. It was the first word she'd heard him speak. "Yes," she said softly, "just like you're on a journey, too." Luca's small hand slipped into hers. From his office window, Anthony watched them in the garden. He stood there for a long time, his phone forgotten on his desk, watching his son smile and explore and slowly come back to life. Dominic entered without knocking, a privilege only he had. "The Mancini situation?" Dominic asked. "Handle it quietly," Anthony said, not taking his eyes off the garden. "No confrontation. I want a paper trail of every legitimate transaction we've made. Let the lawyers deal with their accusations." "You sure we could—" "No." Anthony's voice was firm. "Those days are over. We do this the right way." Dominic followed his boss's gaze to the garden, where Grace was now helping Luca build a small fort out of sticks. "She's good for him," Dominic observed. "She's good for both of us," Anthony said quietly. That evening, after Luca's bath, Grace sat on the edge of his bed, reading a story about a brave dinosaur who learned to make friends. Luca's eyes were heavy, fighting sleep. "Grace," he whispered. "Yes, sweetheart." "Will you be here tomorrow?" Grace's throat tightened. "I'll be here tomorrow, and the day after that. And the day after that. Promise?" "I promise." Luca's hand found hers on top of the blanket. "I like you." "I like you too," Grace said. her voice thick with emotion. Within minutes, Luca was asleep, his face peaceful in a way Rosa said she hadn't seen in years. Grace carefully extracted her hand and stood to leave, but Anthony was standing in the doorway. She didn't know how long he'd been there. He gestured for her to follow him into the hallway, closing Luca's door softly behind them. "He spoke today," Anthony said. "It wasn't a question. Just one word, but yes." Anthony's jaw worked. "Rosa told me." She also said he laughed. Multiple times. Grace nodded, unsure what to say. "I haven't heard my son laugh in so long, I'd almost forgotten what it sounded like." Anthony's voice was rough with emotion. "You did that in one day, one single day." "He just needed someone to meet him where he is," Grace said gently. Anthony looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're not like the others." "The other nannies?" "The other people who walk through this house, treating us like we're broken things to be fixed or dangers to be avoided." He stepped closer. "You treat us like we're human." Grace felt the air shift between them, something electric and terrifying. "You are human," she said softly. "That's what people seem to forget." Anthony's expression flickered with something Grace couldn't quite name. Gratitude, surprise, longing. "Thank you," he said, "for seeing that." He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the long hallway. Grace stood there for a long moment, her heart racing, knowing that something fundamental had just shifted. She was supposed to be the nanny, just the nanny. But already she was becoming something more. The first week unfolded in careful steps. Grace learned Luca's patterns, the way he flinched at loud noises, how he only ate breakfast if she sat beside him, the way he held his breath whenever his father entered the room. Anthony remained distant. He left before dawn and returned after dark, his presence marked only by the sound of his office door closing. But Grace felt him watching, always. One afternoon, while Luca napped, Dominic, the head of security, found Grace in the kitchen making tea. "You're different from the others," he said, leaning against the counter. "The other nannies?" "Yeah, most took one look at the boss and ran." Grace stirred her tea slowly. "Luca needs someone who stays." Dominic's expression softened. "So does he." Before Grace could respond, Rosa appeared in the doorway, her face tight with concern. "Grace, dear, there's something you should see." Grace followed Rosa down a hallway she hadn't explored. The older woman stopped at a closed door and hesitated. "I probably shouldn't show you this," Rosa said quietly, "but you need to understand what you've walked into." She opened the door. Inside was a small room, untouched and preserved. A woman's silk scarf draped over a chair, photos on the wall. A beautiful woman with dark hair and Luca's smile, her arms around Anthony, both of them laughing like they'd never known sorrow. "Mrs. Moretti," Rosa whispered. "Isabella. She died 4 years ago in a car explosion. It was meant for Anthony. Retaliation from a rival family. The Mancinis." Grace's chest tightened. "And Luca?" "He was in the car, survived without a scratch on the outside." Rosa's voice broke. "But inside, he hasn't been the same since." The weight of it settled over Grace like heavy snow. That evening, after Luca fell asleep, Grace wandered downstairs. The house was too quiet. She hummed softly, gathering stray toys from the living room. That's when she saw it. A newspaper, half hidden beneath a sofa cushion, old, yellowed. The headline stopped her cold. Mafia boss Anthony Moretti, suspected in harbor incident. 3 dead, her hands went numb. The photo showed a younger Anthony, same unreadable expression, being escorted from a courthouse in handcuffs. The article detailed allegations of racketeering, illegal shipping operations, connections to organized crime families, mafia. Everything clicked into place. The bodyguards, the fortress-like security, the way people spoke in code, the tension whenever certain names were mentioned. She'd been so naive. Grace's breath came shallow. She needed to leave. Tonight. Pack her things and you weren't supposed to find that. She spun around. Anthony stood in the doorway, still in his suit, his face carefully neutral. I was just cleaning, Grace stammered, her heart racing. I know. He stepped into the room, not threatening, just tired. It's old news, from another life. But it's true, isn't it? Grace's voice came out barely above a whisper. The connections, the allegations, the past. Anthony's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, yes, I was born into that world. My father, my grandfather, it's what we knew. But I've been working for 4 years to get out, to build something legitimate, something I can pass to my son without shame. He moved closer, and Grace forced herself not to step back. My wife believed I could change, he continued, his voice rough with emotion. She saw something in me I didn't see in myself, and she died because of my past, because I thought I could protect her while keeping one foot in that world. His hands clenched at his sides. I was wrong, and I have to live with that knowledge every single day. So I've been dismantling everything my family built, converting illegal operations to legal businesses, cutting ties with old associates. It's slow, it's dangerous, but it's the only way forward. Grace's mind raced. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But then she heard it, small footsteps on the stairs. Grace? Luca stood at the bottom of the staircase in his pajamas, his eyes wide with fear. I had a bad dream about the loud noise, the fire, the car explosion, the trauma he relived every night. Anthony's expression cracked, raw pain flooding through. He took a step toward his son, then stopped, frozen by his own guilt and fear. Grace watched this powerful man paralyzed by love and grief, unable to cross the distance to his own child. She moved without thinking. She knelt down and opened her arms. Luca ran to her. You're safe, she murmured into his hair, her heart breaking for both of them. I'm right here. Over the boy's head, her eyes met Anthony's. He was looking at her with an expression of such desperate gratitude, it stole her breath. Trust. Don't go, Luca whispered against her shoulder. Please don't leave like the others. Everyone always leaves. Grace thought of the shrine upstairs, the mother Luca had lost, the father too consumed by guilt to reach for his own son. The revolving door of nannies who'd taken one look at this complicated family and run. She thought of every child she'd met in foster care, abandoned, afraid, convinced they were fundamentally unlovable. In the dim light of that cold, beautiful house, standing between a frightened child and a broken man, she made a choice. I'm not going anywhere, she said, meaning it with everything she had. Anthony's eyes closed briefly. When he opened them again, something fundamental had changed. He crossed the room and knelt beside them, his large hand gentle on his son's back. We're all right here, he said softly. All 3 of us, together. Luca turned and wrapped one arm around his father, the other still holding tight to Grace. And in that moment, something shifted. A wall began to crack. A family started learning how to reach for each other again. "Thank you," Anthony whispered to Grace over Luca's head, "for staying, for not running when you had every reason to." Grace met his eyes and saw not the mafia boss from the newspaper headline, but a father desperately trying to protect his son and redeem his past. "You're welcome," she said quietly. It was the beginning of something neither of them had expected, something dangerous, something inevitable, something that would change all of their lives. The next morning, Grace woke to the smell of burnt toast and something else, laughter. She rushed downstairs to find Luca standing on a chair in the kitchen, trying to reach the toaster. Smoke curled from the slots, and standing beside him, sleeves rolled up and tie loosened, was Anthony. "Careful," Anthony was saying, his large hands steadying the chair. "Let me help." Grace stopped in the doorway, stunned. Anthony glanced up and saw her. For a moment, he looked almost embarrassed, caught doing something ordinary, something fatherly. "Luca wanted to make you breakfast," he explained. "As a surprise, I was trying to supervise." "I wanted to make pancakes," Luca said proudly. "Like you do." Grace's heart squeezed. "That's very sweet. How about we all do it together?" Within minutes, the kitchen transformed into beautiful chaos. Flour dusted the counters and somehow ended up in Anthony's dark hair. Syrup pooled on the floor. Luca's giggles echoed off the marble walls, bright and unfiltered, as Grace taught him how to flip pancakes with theatrical flair. "The secret," Grace explained solemnly, "is in the wrist action." She demonstrated, and the pancake landed perfectly in the pan. "Now you try," she told Luca. Anthony guided Luca's small hands, helping him flip. The pancake wobbled, broke apart, but they celebrated like he'd won a prize. "Perfect," Grace announced. "A rustic, deconstructed pancake. Very trendy." Luca beamed. Anthony's lips twitched with amusement. "And now, the grand finale," Grace announced, tossing a pancake into the air with confidence. It landed on her head. Luca laughed so hard he hiccuped. Even Anthony couldn't contain his smile. "Well," Grace said, pancake sliding down her forehead, "that's one way to wear breakfast." Anthony reached over and carefully removed the pancake, his fingers brushing her temple. The touch was brief but electric. "You have flour on your nose too," he said softly, his eyes warm. "Do I?" Grace touched her face, smearing more flour across her cheek. Luca giggled. "You look silly, Grace." "Silly is my specialty," she declared. They sat at the table together, the three of them, in the sunlight streaming through the tall windows. The kitchen was a mess. They were covered in batter and syrup. It was imperfect and chaotic. It was perfect. Luca talked about dinosaurs between bites of pancake. Grace made up a story about a T-Rex who learned to bake. Anthony listened, his expression softening with each minute that passed. "Daddy," Luca said suddenly, "can you stay home today, please?" Anthony's smile faltered. "I have meetings, buddy, important ones." "More important than me?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Grace saw something shift in Anthony's expression. Pain, realization, decision. He pulled out his phone and typed quickly. Then he set it down and looked at his son. "I just canceled them," Anthony said. "All of them. Today, you're the most important meeting I have." Luca's eyes went wide. "Really? Really, what should we do? Can we go to the park, the one with the ducks?" Anthony looked at Grace. "Is that okay with you?" "It's your day," Grace said gently. "Spend it however you want." "I want you to come too," Luca insisted. "Please?" So they went, all three of them. Dominic drove them in the SUV, keeping a discreet distance. The park was busy with families enjoying the late morning sunshine. At first, Anthony was tense, constantly scanning the area, his body coiled like he was expecting danger. But then Luca grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the duck pond. "Look, Daddy, that one's really fat." Anthony crouched down beside his son, and Grace watched as the tension slowly drained from his shoulders. They fed the ducks stale bread Rosa had packed. They explored the playground. They sat on a blanket in the grass, while Luca drew pictures with the crayons Grace had brought. At one point, Luca fell asleep in the sunshine, exhausted from play. Anthony looked down at his son with an expression of such tender love it made Grace's throat tight. "I haven't done this in years," he said quietly. Just existed with him. No agenda, no schedule, just being present. "He needed it," Grace said. "You both did." Anthony turned to look at her. "You know what the hardest part of losing Isabella was?" Grace shook her head. "It wasn't just losing my wife, it was losing my ability to be a father." His voice was rough. "I was so consumed by guilt and grief that I forgot Luca needed me. I forgot how to reach for him. I convinced myself he was better off, without me getting too close, that I'd somehow contaminate him with my darkness." "But you're reaching now," Grace said softly, "because you showed me how." Anthony's eyes met hers. "You're teaching me how to be present again, how to see what's right in front of me instead of being haunted by what's behind me." The moment hung between them, charged with something unspoken. "This boy just ate breakfast without tears," Grace said, echoing her words from that first chaotic morning. "He fell asleep feeling safe and happy. That's not magic. That's you choosing to show up." Anthony's hand covered hers on the blanket. "Thank you for believing I'm capable of this." His touch was warm, steady. It made Grace's heart race. "You're more capable than you think," she whispered. They sat like that as Luca slept between them, three people learning how to be a family again. When they returned to the house, Rosa was waiting with a knowing smile. "Lunch is ready," she announced, "and Mr. Moretti, your assistant, called. Something about rescheduling everything?" "That's correct," Anthony said, his hand still on Luca's shoulder. "From now on, I'm taking every Tuesday off. Family day, non-negotiable." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, sir." Dominic, standing nearby, gave Anthony a subtle nod of approval. That evening, after Luca went to bed, Anthony found Grace on the back terrace. The city lights glittered in the distance. "Today was good," he said, standing beside her. "It was," Grace agreed. "I've been thinking about what you said, about choosing to show up." Anthony turned to face her fully. "I want to keep showing up, not just for Luca, but for myself, to become the man Isabella believed I could be." "You're already becoming that man," Grace said. "Am I?" His eyes searched hers. "Because sometimes I look at you and I see how you care for my son with this effortless grace, and I wonder if I'll ever be worthy of what you're building here." Grace's breath caught. "Anthony, you've changed this house," he continued. "Changed him, changed me. In just 2 weeks, you've done what 4 years of grief couldn't. You've reminded us how to live." His hand lifted, hesitant, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered at her temple. I don't know what this is between us, he said softly, but I know it's something, and I need you to know that I see you, not just as the woman who cares for my son, but as the person who's teaching me how to hope again. Grace's heart pounded. I see you too, she whispered. Not the man from the headlines or the past you're trying to leave behind. Just you, the father, the man trying to build something better. The moment stretched between them, fragile and electric. Anthony stepped back, as if afraid of what might happen if he stayed too close. Good night, Grace, he said, his voice rough with restraint. Good night, Anthony. But they both knew something had fundamentally shifted. This wasn't just about a nanny and a wounded family anymore. This was about three people learning how to reach for each other across the darkness. And it was only the beginning. 3 weeks in, Grace made a critical mistake. She was tidying the upstairs hallway when she heard voices, low, urgent, coming from Anthony's office. The door was cracked open. We need to move the shipment tonight, a deep voice said. Inca Mancini's people are watching the docks. Grace froze. Mancini, the name Rosa had mentioned, the family responsible for Isabella's death. Then we handle it quietly, Anthony replied, his voice hard. Clean it up. And if they don't back off, then we make sure they understand. Grace's pulse spiked. Shipment. Handle it. Make them understand. Every crime drama she'd ever seen flashed through her mind. Was Anthony really leaving that world behind? Or was she living under the same roof as active danger? Panic clawed at her throat. She backed away from the door and knocked over a vase. It shattered. The office went silent. The door swung open. Anthony stood there, flanked by Dominic. Both men stared at her. Grace? Anthony said carefully. What did you hear? Nothing. I was just... Tell me exactly what you heard. His voice was firm but not harsh. Her words tumbled out in a rush. You said handle it and clean it up, and Mancini's name, and I thought you were planning to hurt someone. Anthony's eyebrows rose slightly. Dominic coughed, badly hiding a laugh. Anthony stepped closer, his voice gentling. Grace, we were discussing accounting records. Mancini's family is trying to find discrepancies in our legitimate shipping contracts. They want to drag us into a legal battle, claim we're still running questionable operations. He pulled out his phone and showed her a spreadsheet. Columns of numbers, legal shipping manifests. We're moving financial documents to our attorney's office tonight for protection. Not contraband, not weapons, just paperwork. Grace's face burned with embarrassment. Oh, Dominic grinned. First time anyone's mistaken the boss for planning something criminal while literally doing accounting. I'm so sorry, Grace said. When I heard Mancini's name and Rosa told me about Isabella, Anthony's expression darkened. What exactly did Rosa tell you? About the car explosion, about why you're trying to leave that world behind. The hallway went silent. Anthony's hands clenched at his sides. When he spoke, his voice was raw with emotion. My wife died because I thought I could protect her while staying in that world. I was wrong. He looked at Grace with an intensity that stole her breath. I've been working for 4 years to get out, legitimately, legally. But people like Mancini don't want me to succeed. If I prove you can leave clean, others will follow. That threatens their control. So you're still in danger, Grace whispered. I'm always navigating risk, but Luca isn't exposed to it. and neither are you. I've made certain of that." His hand lifted, hesitant, and this time he did touch her shoulder, briefly, carefully. "I know what people say about me. Some of it was true. But I need you to trust who I'm becoming, not who I was. Can you do that?" Grace's heart thudded against her ribs. Trust. The most dangerous word in the world. But when she looked at him, at the man who sat through pancake breakfasts, who watched his son with quiet desperation, who was fighting to build something honorable from the ashes of his past, she saw not the man from the newspaper headline, but the father trying to change. "Yes," she whispered, "I can." Something passed between them. Fragile, unspoken, electric. Anthony nodded once. Then he turned back to his office, but at the threshold, he paused. "Grace." "Yes?" "Thank you for caring enough to be concerned. It means you're paying attention to what matters." The door closed softly behind him. Grace stood alone in the hallway, her hands shaking, not from fear, from something far more dangerous. Luca's birthday arrived in early autumn. Grace had been planning it for weeks. Small, intimate, nothing extravagant. Just the four of them. Luca, Anthony, Rosa, and herself. She decorated the dining room with paper streamers and balloons. Rosa baked a lopsided chocolate cake. Grace wrapped books about dinosaurs and space, carefully choosing titles she knew Luca would treasure. Anthony watched from the doorway, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. "I wanted to," Grace replied, adjusting a balloon. "Every child deserves a birthday celebration." "He hasn't celebrated since his mother died." Grace's chest ached. Isabella had been planning Luca's third birthday party when the car exploded. Since then, this day had been marked only by silence and locked doors. "Then maybe it's time," Grace said gently, turning to face him. "Time to remember that joy doesn't dishonor grief, it heals it." Anthony's eyes held hers for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. A crack in the armor he'd worn for 4 years. "Isabella would have liked you," he said softly. "She would have trusted you with him." It was the first time he'd spoken his wife's name aloud in Grace's presence. When Luca came downstairs, his eyes went wide. "Is this for me?" "Happy birthday, sweetheart," Grace said, kneeling to his level. Luca looked at his father, uncertain, afraid to hope. Anthony stepped forward and placed his hand on his son's shoulder. "It's for you, Luca, because you deserve to celebrate." They sang, Rosa's voice warbling, Grace purposely off-key to make Luca giggle, and Anthony's deep baritone surprisingly gentle. Luca closed his eyes tight and blew out the candles, his small hands clasped together. "What did you wish for?" Grace asked. Luca looked up at his father. "I wished for us to be happy again." Anthony's face crumbled. He pulled his son into his arms, fierce, desperate, holding on. "We will be," Anthony whispered. "I promise you that." For the first time, Grace saw tears track down Anthony's face. After cake and presents, a globe, 3 dinosaur books, and a telescope for stargazing, after Luca went to bed clutching his new treasures, Anthony found Grace in the kitchen. She was washing dishes, humming softly. "Rosa will handle that in the morning," he said. "I don't mind." Grace smiled. "It gives me time to think." "About what?" She paused, hands still in the warm water. "About how far Luca's come, how he laughs now, how he's learning to hope again. Because of you." Grace shook her head. "Because you're letting yourself try." Anthony moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne cedar and something richer. "Grace, I need to tell you something." She turned, drying her hands on a towel. His expression was completely unguarded. "I haven't felt anything in 4 years," he said quietly. "Not joy, not hope. I buried everything with Isabella because I thought that's what I deserved, to exist in the cold." His hand lifted, hesitant, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered at her temple. "But you walked into this house and brought light with you. You gave my son back his smile. And you made me remember what it feels like to be truly alive." Grace's breath caught. "Anthony, I'm falling in love with you," he said. "I know I shouldn't. I know you deserve someone with a cleaner past, but I can't pretend anymore. I can't pretend you're just the nanny, that you're just someone temporarily here." The words hung in the air between them, honest, terrifying, beautiful. Grace's heart hammered. Every rational thought told her to step back, to maintain professional boundaries, to protect herself. But when she looked into his eyes, dark and vulnerable and full of hope, "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. Anthony's expression transformed. Relief, wonder, fear. "I don't want to rush this," he said. "I don't want to pressure you. But I need you to know, if you stay, if you choose this, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of that choice." "You already are," she said softly. He leaned down, slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His lips met hers, tentative at first, then deeper. It was a kiss that tasted of hope and second chances, of promises made in the dark. When they pulled apart, the kitchen was bathed in moonlight. "Stay," Anthony whispered against her forehead. "Not just for Luca, for me, for us." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "I'm not going anywhere." He pulled her close, holding her like she was the answer to a prayer he'd stopped believing could be heard. Upstairs, in his bedroom, Luca slept peacefully for the first time in years. And in the kitchen, 2 wounded people found the courage to heal together. The crisis came on a Tuesday afternoon. Grace and Luca had developed a routine. Every Tuesday, they went to the park near the waterfront. Luca loved the duck pond, the way the water reflected the sky, the sound of wings beating across the surface. It was their safe place. But on this particular Tuesday, everything changed. Grace bent down to tie Luca's shoe. It took maybe 10 seconds. When she looked up, he was gone. Her heart stopped. "Luca!" She spun in a circle, scanning the playground. Children played on swings. Parents chatted on benches. The world kept moving normally, but Luca, her Luca, was nowhere. Panic seized her throat. She ran through the park, calling his name. Other parents turned to stare. Some offered to help. Grace barely heard them. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and called Anthony. "He's gone," she said, her voice breaking. "I turned around for just a moment and he's gone. Anthony, I can't find him." "Where are you?" His voice was controlled, too controlled. The voice of a man who'd lived through his worst nightmare once before and would move heaven and earth to prevent it from happening again. "The duck pond, the park on. I know it. Stay there. Keep looking. I'm coming now." The line went dead. Within 5 minutes, black SUVs pulled up to the park entrance. Men in suits fanned out across the grounds, methodical, efficient, purposeful. Then Anthony arrived. He'd driven himself. His face was pale, his jaw locked tight. When his eyes found Grace's, she saw the terror he was trying to contain. "Where did you last see him?" His voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly. "The duck pond. He always goes there first. He loves watching the—" Grace stopped mid-sentence. The duck pond. She'd been searching the playground, the paths, the parking lot, all the places a lost child might wander. But Luca didn't like crowds. He liked quiet spaces, hidden spaces. "The willow trees," she whispered, "on the far side of the pond." She ran. Anthony followed, his longer strides keeping pace. They rounded the pond, and there, sitting on a wooden bench beneath the drooping branches of an old willow tree, was Luca. He was crying. Grace's knees nearly gave out from relief. She dropped down in front of him, her hands gentle on his small shoulders. "Luca, sweetheart, what's wrong? Why did you leave?" "I thought Daddy didn't love me anymore," Luca sobbed, his face crumpling. "He's always gone. He works all the time, just like before Mommy died. And then she went away forever, and I thought if I disappeared, he'd notice. He'd come looking. He'd remember I'm still here." Grace's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Behind her, she heard Anthony's breath catch, a sound like something breaking inside him. He moved past her and fell to his knees beside his son. His hands, those same hands that commanded boardrooms and respect, shook as they reached for the small boy. "Luca," Anthony said, and his voice cracked completely. "Luca, look at me." The boy lifted his tear-streaked face. "I love you," Anthony said fiercely. "I love you more than anything in this world. I'm so sorry. I'm so deeply sorry I made you think otherwise. I'm sorry I've been absent. I'm sorry I let my fear and guilt keep me from you." He pulled Luca into his arms, desperate, complete, unguarded. "I miss Mommy too," Luca whispered into his father's shoulder. "Every single day." I know you do." Anthony's own tears fell now, unchecked. "I miss her too, but I'm here. I'm right here, and I'm never going to make you feel alone again. I promise you with everything I am." Luca clung to him, his small body shaking with sobs years in the making. Anthony looked at Grace over his son's head, his eyes raw, grateful, devastated, asking for help because he'd forgotten how to navigate this alone. Grace knelt beside them both and wrapped her arms around them. "You're not alone," she whispered. "Neither of you. Not anymore." Anthony's hand found hers and gripped tight, holding on like she was an anchor in a storm. For a long time, the three of them stayed like that beneath the willow tree. The rest of the park faded away. Dominic and his team kept a respectful distance. The world slowed down. And in that quiet space, something fundamental shifted. A wall came down, a heart opened, a family began to truly heal. When they finally stood, Anthony kept Luca in his arms, refusing to let go. They walked back to the cars together, Grace's hand in Anthony's free one. "From now on," Anthony said quietly, "I'm taking Tuesdays off. Every Tuesday we go to the park, together, all three of us." Luca's eyes widened with hope. "Really?" "Really, and I'll be home for dinner every night." Anthony looked at Grace with an expression that made her breath catch. "If that's all right with you?" "It's more than all right," she said softly. That evening, after Luca fell asleep, exhausted but peaceful, Anthony found Grace on the back terrace. The city lights glittered in the distance. The air smelled of autumn leaves and possibility. "I almost lost him today," Anthony said, his voice rough, "the same way I lost Isabella, because I was too afraid to hold on tight enough." Grace turned to him. "But you didn't lose him. You found him, and he found you. We found each other. Anthony stepped closer. Because you were brave enough to stay when everyone else ran. Brave enough to love us when we'd forgotten how to love ourselves. He took her hands in his, warm and steady. Grace Miller, I don't have much to offer that's simple or uncomplicated, but I have a son who adores you, a home that finally feels warm, and a heart that's yours, completely, honestly, for as long as you'll have it. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Anthony, I'm not proposing marriage, he said quickly. Not yet, but I'm asking you to stay, not as the nanny, as part of this family, as the woman I love, as the person who taught me that redemption isn't about forgetting the past. It's about building something better because of it. Grace's smile was trembling and bright. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. The kind of kiss that spoke of tomorrows and choices and love earned through truth. When they pulled apart, the stars were bright above them. Come on, Anthony said, lacing his fingers through hers. Let's go home. And Grace realized she already was there. 6 weeks later, Grace stood in her tiny studio apartment, packing the last of her boxes. It felt surreal, leaving this place that had been her landing pad after college, her refuge, her starting point. But it had never truly felt like home. Home was somewhere else now. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Anthony stood in the hallway, dressed casually in jeans and a navy sweater. He looked younger like this, lighter. The hard edges she'd first seen had softened into something gentler. Need help? He asked, gesturing to the boxes. Dominic's coming with the car soon, Grace said, smiling. But I'll take the company. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the small space. So this is where you lived. For 3 years, it's not much, but it's yours. Anthony's voice was warm. That makes it significant. He picked up a photo frame from the nightstand. Grace with a group of foster kids from her old job, all of them grinning at the camera. You miss them, he observed, every day. Grace moved beside him. That's why I wanted to open the center, so kids like them, kids who've been through systems and shelters, and people giving up on them, would have a safe place. Anthony set the photo down carefully. Then he pulled a folder from inside his jacket and handed it to her. What's this? Grace asked. Open it. She did. Inside were legal documents, property deeds, architectural plans, financial statements showing an account in her name, with more money than she'd ever imagined seeing. Grace's hands trembled. Anthony, what is this? The building on 7th Street, he said quietly. 3 stories, perfect layout for a child care center. I bought it last month and had it transferred to your name, along with enough funding to run it for the first 5 years. Grace couldn't breathe. Tears blurred her vision. I can't accept this. It's too much. I could never. Anthony stepped closer, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Yes, you can, because you gave my son his life back. You gave me mine, and because every child deserves what you're trying to build. A place where they're seen, valued, loved without condition. His voice roughened with emotion. This isn't charity, Grace. It's an investment in something genuinely good. Something that matters. And it's named after you, the Grace Miller Center for Children. Grace's tears spilled over. Why would you do this for me? Because you taught me that redemption isn't about running from your past. It's about using everything you've learned to build something better. Anthony's thumb brushed away her tears. My wealth came from a world I'm leaving behind. Let me transform it into something that helps instead of harms. Let me prove that real change is possible. Anthony, and because I love you, he said simply. Because you believe in second chances. Because you saw a broken man and a frightened child and decided we were worth saving. Grace couldn't speak. She threw her arms around him and held on tight. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for trusting me, for letting me into your life. Thank you for staying, he murmured against her hair. They stood like that for a long moment, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, who'd chosen hope over fear, love over safety. When they pulled apart, Anthony smiled. There's someone waiting downstairs. He insisted on coming to help you move. Grace's heart lifted. Luca? He said it's what families do. Families. The word settled over her like a warm blanket. They carried the boxes down together. Outside, Dominic waited with the SUV, but beside it stood Luca, holding a bouquet of wildflowers he'd clearly picked himself. These are for you, Luca said shyly. Rosa said people give flowers when someone moves to a new home. Grace knelt down and took the flowers, her heart overflowing. They're perfect. Thank you, sweet boy. Are you really coming to live with us? Luca asked, his eyes bright with hope. Forever? Grace looked at Anthony, saw the same question in his eyes, the same hopeful vulnerability. Yes, she said, forever. Luca whooped with joy and threw his arms around her neck. Rosa made your favorite cookies, and I helped. Well, I ate some of the dough, but I helped too. Grace laughed, full and bright and free. They drove back to the house together, Luca chattering the entire way about the room they'd prepared for her, about the surprise dinner Rosa was making, about all the adventures they'd have now that Grace was truly, permanently part of the family. When they pulled through the iron gates, the same gates that had intimidated Grace on that rainy morning months ago, everything looked different. The mansion wasn't cold anymore. Lights glowed in every window. Music drifted from the kitchen. Rosa waved from the doorway, her stern face broken by a genuine smile. Anthony helped Grace from the car, his hand warm and steady in hers. Welcome home, he said softly. Home. Not a place she was hired to work, not a temporary stop on her journey. Home. That evening, after dinner, after Luca shared every detail of his day, after Rosa fussed over Grace's room, after Dominic made a joke about finally getting some common sense in this house, the three of them sat together at the breakfast table. The same table where they'd shared that first chaotic pancake breakfast. Luca had syrup on his cheek. Grace's hair was coming loose from its bun. Anthony's tie was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up. And in the golden light of early evening, they looked like what they'd become. A family, not perfect, not simple, but real. Can we do stargazing tonight? Luca asked, his eyes bright. With my telescope? Absolutely, Anthony said. All three of us. Later, on the rooftop terrace, with Luca's small hand in hers and Anthony's arm around her shoulders, Grace looked up at the stars. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fear, the doubt, the choice to stay when everything told her to run. She thought about the man beside her who'd learned that true strength wasn't control but vulnerability. That power meant nothing without compassion. And she thought about the boy between them, who'd taught both of them that love was always worth the risk. What are you thinking? Anthony asked softly. Grace smiled. That sometimes the best stories aren't the ones we plan. They're the ones that find us when we're brave enough to believe. In what? In second chances, in redemption, in love that heals instead of harms. Anthony pressed a kiss to her temple. I used to think my story ended when Isabella died, that I'd used up my chance at happiness. And now I know it was just the end of one chapter. He looked at her with eyes full of warmth and wonder. You helped me write a new one. Luca tugged on Grace's sleeve. Look, a shooting star. They all looked up just in time to see it streak across the sky. Brief, bright, beautiful. Make a wish, Grace whispered. Luca closed his eyes tight. Anthony's hand found Grace's and squeezed gently. And Grace realized she didn't need to wish for anything. Everything she'd ever wanted was right here. A family built not on blood or obligation, but on choice. A home filled not with silence, but with laughter and warmth. A love story that wasn't perfect, but was perfectly theirs. In the morning, they would wake up together, share breakfast, start another day. Anthony would continue, transforming his business completely, leaving the old world further behind with each decision. Grace would open her childcare center, giving other children the second chances she'd been given. And Luca would grow up knowing he was loved, fiercely, completely, without reservation. But tonight, under the stars, they were simply three people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to build something bright. Not a fairy tale, a real story. The kind that leaves you believing in the quiet, everyday miracles of love, trust, and coming home. Sometimes, fate doesn't arrive with drama or grand gestures. It comes in small moments, a child's smile, a hand offered in trust, the courage to believe that broken things can be made whole again. This is a story about redemption earned through action, not words. About how a man born into the mafia world learned that the greatest power is choosing love over control. About a young woman who proved that bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's loving anyway. It's an inspirational reminder that we all deserve second chances. That family isn't just who you're born to, but who chooses to stay. That even in the darkest places, light can grow if we're brave enough to let it in. This is a romance built on respect, where both people see each other clearly. On reciprocity, where care flows both ways. On vulnerability, where walls come down honestly. On choice, where staying matters more than arriving. And on commitment, where love is proven through consistent action. These are the 5 foundations that turn attraction into partnership, desire into devotion, and connection into something that lasts. It's a motivational testament to the truth that transformation is possible, that who we were doesn't have to define who we become. That power without compassion is hollow, but strength paired with tenderness can change everything. And it's a promise that somewhere, right now, there's someone fighting their way towards something better. Someone choosing hope over fear. Someone learning to love again after loss. If you've ever believed in second chances, if you've fought for someone you love, if you've chosen to stay when leaving felt easier, this story is for you. If you believe that redemption is possible, that love can heal, that families can be built from courage and choice rather than circumstance, thank you for being here. Thank you for believing. Thank you for letting this story into your heart. Before you go, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Because every week, we bring you stories of hope, healing and love that feels real. Stories that remind us all that no matter how dark the night, dawn is always coming. Until next time, may your nights be filled with peace, your days with purpose, and your heart with the knowledge that you are worthy of every good thing. Even after the longest winter, dawn always comes, and it's always worth the wait.